Hello, hello, hello. We are live, and Mr. Steve Langley made it on time. So disregard what I put in chat about him being late. How's it going, Steve?
Yeah, pretty good. How are you?
Good, good. I don't know if we have anybody watching. I don't generally go at lunchtime, but I had the time at lunchtime today, and so did Steve. So we decided we'd do a live stream. Um, this live stream and my last live stream are a part of kind of a little mini series, I guess, that I'd like to go through, and I've been calling it Confessions of a Fish Breeder. And today's topic, I want to talk about risk management in your fish room and or fish tanks, because, well, I guess a lot of what we have to talk about pertains to just fish keeping as well, eh, Steve?
Yeah, yeah, I'd say so.
So, why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about this? And there's a lot of reasons that we're going to talk about this. And again, a lot of these reasons pertain to specifically fish breeders that are trying to breed fish for a profit. And it also pertains to people just buying new fish or having one or two fish tanks in their house. A lot of this pertains to both, and this is why we're going to talk about it. Some of the reasons, anyways. You'll have better fish health. Your fish will be healthier if you follow some of these pointers. Bottom line, your fish will be healthier. Um, Less need of medications. I wrote lots of stuff down, by the way, everybody, so I wouldn't forget what I'm talking about. Less need of medications. If you use some of these risk management techniques or risk mitigation, whatever you want to talk about, however you would like to say it, you will need less medications because your fish will get sick less often. Bottom line. And in turn, that'll save you money because you won't lose fish, expensive livestock, and or quality fry that you're trying to raise up to sell. And you will use less medications, therefore needing to spend less money on them. You'll produce more quality fish. Bottom line. If you reduce your risks in your fish room, you will produce more quality fish. And it will give you a better ability to produce fish more consistently. So if you're trying to establish yourself as selling to fish stores, being a wholesaler, or even having your own customers, this will allow you the ability to be more consistent with your quality of fish you're selling and your quantity of fish for selling. And that's pretty important. Would you not say, Steve, if you have a customer, say a fish store that relies on you supplying them with bristlenose plecos consistently because they're consistently selling them and they don't want to look for another supplier, that'd be a pretty big piss off for them if, every other month or whatever, you can't supply because you had a problem within your system.
Yeah, definitely. They fish stores, they want reliability. So if you can't produce reliably, then they'll look elsewhere.
Exactly. And then if the next guy's producing more reliably than you, who's getting the boot, do you think?
Yep.
So, and that comes into the next point I was going to make is, so you have a better ability to maintain a reputation as a reliable vendor to your customers, right? So if you're more consistent in your fish room, you're reducing your risks, you're not having big fry losses or diseases in your tanks, you're obviously going to maintain your reputation. If you have diseases a lot and people hear about it a lot, I'm sorry, but people are very cruel. Even if you had a disease in your tanks a year ago, and if someone remembers it and posts it on social media, you're probably not going to sell a whole lot of fish.
Yep.
All right, so this is the nuts and bolts of it, basically. Um, how can we reduce risks in our fish room? So we should be able to have some good discussions on this, and if anybody has any questions or comments to make during the live stream, by all means, bring them up. And today we're actually streaming on both my JN Aquarium Supply Facebook page and YouTube as well. So the reason I did that is I have some people that like to watch my streams that aren't real YouTube savvy. It would be neat if they could learn how to subscribe and watch through YouTube, but they don't have to. And they are able to get on through Facebook. So that's why I've done that. All right, so Steve, I think probably the number one way we can reduce risks of sick fish, malnourished fish, fish that don't grow to their full potential, fish that seem to be kind of growing a bit lazy, not growing real fast, bacterial infections, you name it, and that is having consistent, good water quality. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think that's probably the number one thing, is being on top of your water changes and making sure that you're always maintaining that aquarium.
And so maybe consistency as well, right? So if the longer your water sits in your aquarium, things change when certain minerals get used up in the water. We've also talked, I know at the club, we've talked in the past about hormone buildup in the water column. I don't know how much stock I put in that, but people have, and I think you have as well, talked about that and seen that problem as well.
Yeah, definitely. I notice it with cichlids, especially. You always get that growth rate variation, so you end up with some that are 3 times bigger than others. And from what I've researched, a lot of that has to do with just hormones that are released by the fish. Like you always have that dominance pecking order, right? So the ones that are growing the fastest are emitting hormones that prevent the younger ones from growing as quickly.
So I believe that to be the same in the Plecostomus world as well.
Yeah, most likely in more than just cichlids, but I notice it mostly because I breed a lot of angels.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying all cichlids, South Americans, African cichlids, you're saying all cichlids you noticed it in, basically all you've kept.
All the ones that I've had, yeah.
Yeah, and we have somebody watching, Leah, and she says hormones can stunt growth, and discus are notorious for that as well.
Yeah, there you go.
Right, so when you do your water changes consistently, you're removing those excess hormones out of the water as well. You're replenishing the nutrients that do get dissolved, whether they get dissolved in as fertilizer for your plants or whatever, and that way you're able to stay more consistent.
Yeah. The more water changes you do with a lot of fry, the more consistent the growth will be across all of the fish.
Most definitely. And I guess...
And faster. They grow much faster.
They do, and you can attest for this. So for anybody that doesn't know, Steve is a great fish breeder. Steve has basically mastered breeding a few types of angelfish. I'm not going to say all, right? You haven't gotten into them all, but many types of angelfish. And now you're doing convicts, now you're doing ancestress, guppies, and other live bears as well. And he's been very successful, I'd say, with pretty much everything you've tried to breed. You were breeding rams for a while. So, yes, well, I guess what I'm saying is you can trust what Steve is saying, and just anybody that didn't know much about what you do, Steve. Um, so yeah, and this is why I like having these conversations with Steve, because he is extremely knowledgeable about this. Now, with the water changes as well, you're going to attest to what I'm about to say, and that is we generally overfeed as we're raising fry, right? We want to make sure every fry gets ample food to get the maximum amount of growth so we can grow them quicker and turn them over for sale or rehome quicker. So that's where our water changes come in as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think I spend more feeding the snails than I do the fish, but
Yeah, yeah.
you
Most
really notice the overfeeding by the snail population. If you can take netfuls of snails out of your tank regularly, then you're feeding a little too much. But when you're trying to raise fish, that's what you do.
Yeah, yeah, we want to make sure, and I guess so that takes a huge toll on your water quality. So you need to have fantastic biofiltration, sometimes mechanical and chemical filtration as well. But water changes is where you're going to notice the most difference. So I guess, oh, you know what we always tell people, Steve, when somebody's get new into aquariums coming in and say, well, 1 inch of fish per gallon. Well, we almost never do this while we're breeding fish. Many of our breeder tanks will be well under that number,
Yeah.
but our broadstock tanks and our grow out tanks will be well over that number. Um, and water changes and extra filtration is how we achieve that without having negative results.
Yep. Yeah, I have some good examples of that. I have a 20-gallon aquarium with a pair of angels that are breeding. So that's well understocked. But the tank right next door has a pair of breeding convicts with probably 300 fry in it, and it's also a 20-gallon tank.
Wow. So
But
300
but
fry, what size?
they're probably a quarter-inch now.
And you'll keep them in there until they're what, an inch-ish?
I keep them in there as long as I can because it slows the convict breeding down. Because
Mm,
they won't breed again until the babies are gone.
right. So I guess like that'll bring us
But
into. Sorry, go
they're
ahead.
getting to the point where they're gonna have to move out. But that tank, I'm doing water changes 2 or 3 times a week, whereas the angel breeding tank next door is only getting a water change every other week.
But able to maintain the water quality because you have it
Yeah,
understocked. I
exactly.
do the I do the same thing in most of my breeder tanks. I drastically understock them, and yeah, I think because sometimes it's better just to leave them alone. And
Yep.
especially with a lot of different kinds of fish, sometimes it's better just to leave them alone. So the less you can disturb them, the better. As long as you're still maintaining water quality, and that's why you'd understock the tank.
Yep.
Um, okay, so that's good for water quality for now. I got a whole list of stuff to talk about here. So we come into more stuff about water quality a little further into the podcast. So the next thing I'm going to bring up is quarantining new fish. Now, from as some of you know, I have a good friend, Paul Menestas, and he is a veterinarian, and he is specialized in aquatic veterinary medicine. And I've had him on the show. It was called Ask the Doctor. Um, and what Paul recommended was at least 4 weeks. 4 weeks quarantine in a closed system. A system where it's not near any of your other fish. You're not trading water from that tank to another fish. You're making sure everything is either all the equipment you're going to use to look after that tank, example, nets, buckets, siphons, testing equipment, everything else either needs to be really, really sanitized after you use it or just used on that tank. Now, I don't know many people that quarantine for 4 weeks. Do you, Steve?
So I actually have a little bit of a story around this one.
Look,
I bought a bunch of high coverage Koi Angels probably about 2 years ago, and I had them by themselves quarantined in a tank for almost 2 months. I was just growing them out in that tank by themselves, nothing else going in or out of that tank. And I thought that they were fine. And I moved a couple of them into a different tank because I wasn't too worried about those ones. I didn't want to focus on them in terms of breeding. So I put them in a community tank with a bunch of other angels. And next thing I knew, I had a whole tank full of fish that wouldn't eat.
oh,
And over the course of the next 4 weeks, I lost every single fish in that tank.
wow. The fish that you had in quarantine, were they eating when they were in quarantine?
The four that were left in quarantine were still eating and no problems. Soon as I switched them around, all hell broke loose. They stopped eating. They started infecting other fish. All those fish stopped eating. I think I lost. I don't know how many fish I lost. Probably 40 or 50 fish,
Oh, wow.
and eventually all of them stopped eating and died off. And it took me almost a year to get rid of that out of my fish room.
And what was it?
Never knew. I
Never
had
knew, eh?
I had PJ come in and we did some courses of medication, and nothing would work.
Hmm.
And I lost all my black ram breeding groups. I lost all my black angels that I was raising out. And it was just from because the tanks were next to each other, and I guess something jumped over or something splashed, or
Wow. And
it
that's
just
all it takes.
that's all it takes.
Wow. I've had a similar situation, and I needed PJ's help as well. I was actually his very first customer um, for fish veterinary services. I was his very first customer, and it was actually kind of a, I wouldn't say it was awkward. It was a little awkward. He didn't really know how to, you know what I mean, figure out how we're going to do home visits for fish and stuff like that. But we
Right.
figured it out, and we actually developed a pretty cool friendship out of it. Um, but I had, and I'm going to say this wrong, I never call them the right word, but Calamanus worms, the little red worms that stick out of your fish's butts,
Yeah.
I got them on, as far as I can tell from my Sherlock Holmesing skills, I believe I picked them up on some aquatic plants that I got at an aquarium club auction. That's the only thing, because I'm always very, very careful about not bringing pathogens into my tanks, because as Steve just mentioned and what I've experienced, you can wipe out your entire everything you've worked, all the hours you put in, the money you put in, not to mention the death of your fish, the loss of life. Everything you put in can be wiped out from a live plant. So these Calamanus worms required a vet visit, required some levamisole medication, a lot of it actually. I had 4 infected tanks, and I basically risked losing about $6,000 worth of fish. I still did lose about $1,500 worth of fish out of it, but we did save the rest. But this all could have been avoided if I had not been complacent, if I had done more research, and research is huge for risk management. If I had done more research and looked into this more, I would have dipped my plants to make sure I wasn't bringing anything in. And if I had done that, I could have avoided a lot of money loss and a lot of fish life loss.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to go through, and it can happen very quickly to anybody.
Yeah, and it can happen, and you feel like an ass. You feel like you screwed up. But really sometimes it's called learning experiences and realizing how easily some of this stuff can happen. A lot of us keep very hardy fish that are able to withstand a lot of things, but it can be that one microorganism that destroys your fish room or your fish tank.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, it's been, and this gives you 4 weeks is what's recommended. And this gives you the opportunity to observe the fish as well. We're talking about fish breeding and risk management in fish breeding. So some things we want to observe for, say we're bringing in new breeding stock, that they're good quality stock and they don't have any, that gives you a month to look at them. And sometimes when you first buy a fish, or say you're getting fish shipped to you, you don't really get that real close-up look. Like I take a magnifying glass to look at some stuff on my fish sometimes. So it gives you a month to really think about it, take your emotions out of it, the price point out of it, everything else, and look at the fish for what they really are, and make a decision on whether they are good enough quality to join your breeding program.
And then I would suggest another month just to be safe.
Right? Right? That's, yeah. So a lot of people are in a mad rush to jump into fish breeding, get rich quick. You know, Steve, you're rich from breeding fish, and so am I, right?
God. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, right. I've if you want to make $1 million, spend $2 million breeding fish.
Exactly.
So a lot of people are in a big rush. Impatience. I think impatience kills fish rooms. Bottom line. Impatience. Want to jump right in and get your fish breeding. Trust me, take your time. Your fish will do it when they're ready to do it. Bottom line. You're not going to rush it. You're not going to wish it happened. It's going to happen when it happens. And I find the more time you take to set it up and do it properly, the better results you get.
Yeah, you're not gonna get rich from breeding fish. You're gonna do it just because you enjoy fish keeping.
Yeah, bottom line, and I think that's why it's even more imperative that you do a lot of risk management with your tanks, so it doesn't cost you more money, even more money. Like it's
Yeah,
there is
definitely.
some ways to make money in this hobby, but you're not going to get rich. You might be able to make money to support your hobby and maybe get a little bit extra if you go gung ho. But if you include your man hours into the equation, oh wow, you'll realize that your day job pays you extremely well compared
Yeah,
to your when you get home job of managing a fish room.
absolutely. I mean,
Okay, so
I breed a lot of fish, but it's not because I'm trying to make money. It's because I want to offset some of the costs of having a fish room.
most definitely, and that's a great way to do it, and it's a great mind frame there as well, because then you're not, if you're depending on it for an income, Like if you've made that decision that you're going to try to either supplement your income or depend on it for your income, that's a whole other stress level, and that'll be a whole other level of risk management as well.
Yep.
Terry says, through the years there have been a few species-specific viruses that have wiped out many fish worms, notably guppies and angels.
Yep.
Do you think that's because guppies and angels are probably the most bred fish by hobbyists?
Maybe.
Be close, eh? Be close, I think. I would say African cichlids, but there's so many different species of African cichlids. I think guppies would beat out each individual species of
Yeah.
cichlids being bred.
I know it was 15 years ago the angel virus went around and wiped out millions of fish. That
Rico
was
Stan. Oh, sorry, Steve. Go ahead. I thought you were done.
no, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Rico Stan says he's not interested in selling fish, but I feel like when they breed, I am doing things right and giving them what they need, not to just live, but thrive.
Absolutely.
That's what it's all about. Bottom line, all about. And all these risk management techniques we're talking about are to do exactly that. Get your fish to thrive, get your fish to a sellable size as quickly as you can, and as healthfully as you can. If healthfully is a word, I'm not sure, but I just made her up.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So yeah, quarantining, I'd say that is just so important, so important. And I see Brian from Detroit Shrimp and Aquatics has just come on to the chat as well. Hello, Brian. And Brian's been on my live stream show as well. And he deals with mostly shrimp. And I think quarantining with shrimp is probably even more important than fish. And I've only said fish on here when shrimp are invertebrates. So we'll include invertebrates into that as well. So yeah, quarantining gives you lots of time to look for parasites, infections, observe their quality if they are good breeding stock, or if you're like, no man, too many defects, too many bent fins, I don't like the color, fins aren't long enough, fins are too long, fins are too short, so many body shape is not correct. So many things to look for before you add fish to your breeding stock if you're trying to breed quality fish. And that brings me to my next point, which is nothing to do with water at all, which most of what we've talked about so far is about your water or things that are infecting your fish. Starting with the best breeding stock available to you. Where do you think that lays on the importance of risk management for fish breeding, Steve?
Well, it's an interesting one. You know, the better the quality fish you start with, the better you're going to be in the long run. You won't run into as many genetic problems and just quality problems of the fry. Um, you know, they'll be healthier fish overall.
But it still does not guarantee that your fry are going to be quality. You could
No,
have
it does.
two,
No, you're right. It doesn't.
but it's a lot easier to start with some good genetics and good looking fish than it is to start with, I guess, let's say guppies, Steve. Let's say you're into international guppy shows and you want to enter your guppies into these huge guppy shows and have them judged on their quality. If you start with like Big Al's guppies, you're going to be years and years and years and years, if ever, of culling, of having crappy fry, everything. You're going to be that far back behind the ball of developing a show quality fish that is deserving to go to shows than you would have if you purchased show quality fish in the beginning.
Yeah, I guess if you're into that kind of thing, then if you're going into shows and competitions, and you definitely want to. It's just like breeding dogs, right? Like you're not going to go to the store and buy a mutt and expect to enter, purebred kinds of shows.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends on what you're after. But again, it's to start with good quality fish is one thing, but a lot of times you can find good quality fish that don't look very good because of the conditions they've been raised in.
Very true. So you're talking
Right.
environmental factors
So
that have.
yeah, it's kind of hard to tell, right? Because if you've got a top quality fish, for example, that ships from Thailand, and it spends a week in a bag, and then it goes to a pet store and it sits in a pet store for a month. By the time you get that fish, the fins have been eroded. It's emaciated because it's not being fed enough. It might look terrible, and so you bypass it. But you, that fish should originally came from a top quality place,
Right.
right? So it really depends on the environment that it's been raised in as well.
Yeah, and it might have parasites. It might have whatever. You
Yeah,
would need to get all that cleaned up and
you don't know what it. Yeah,
hope that it's able to reproduce after going through all that, because that's something else. If you get sometimes, right, if you get some fish that have been too badly cared for, or let's say you buy some fish that were in a tank where the heater malfunctioned and went up to like 95 degrees, but the fish lived. But they could very well be sterile after something like that.
yeah,
So yeah, you have to watch out for that kind of stuff too. So that would lean me more to want to get a fish that still looks good too, that's been cared for. That I know that my chances of them, I guess, not being able to breed maybe down a bit.
yeah. Eh, Yeah, I mean, starting with fish that look good and look healthy is probably a high priority for people that are looking to breed fish.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the fish might have come from a lesser quality line, if the fish is healthy, at least you can work with it.
Most definitely, most definitely. So before I get to my next point on that same topic, Terry says store-bought guppies breed store-bought guppies. Most of the time. I guess you'd get a gem once in a while. But in
Yeah,
that,
I mean, that's true. But if that's what you're looking to produce, then that's fine, right?
yeah, it's what you're happy with. When it boils down to it, if you're breeding fish for profit, it's what other people want is what you have to breed, or you won't make any money. But if you're just a home aquarist and you breed a few hobbyists and you just breed a few fish, it's what you like. Do what you like.
Yep.
Brian says, I can't even pronounce that word. Can you pronounce it, Steve?
Oh, I don't.
Hello, bops. That
I
word
don't say
there
it.
is an issue if you get from a bad importer. Also, short skirts and bacterias. Try to get from someone who has bred many times with same fish or shrimp to show they are good genes. And that's a very good point. If you have, and that's why I say get the best quality that's available to you. So if you have some local hobbyists that want to share the same fish or whatever, that's sometimes a very good avenue to take to get some quality fish.
Yep.
And not during lockdown period Most hobbyists will let you into their fish room, and you can probably see where your future breeding stock or future fish is coming from.
Yeah, that's a good one. These days you're not going to be able to do that, but it's always nice to see where they're coming from.
I guess with video now, Steve, if you're buying, like, I'm gonna sell, and I'm not trying to promote anything here, but I'm gonna sell some longfin ancestress pairs here coming up shortly. Adults, full-size adults, breeding pairs ready to go. I'm going to ask good money for them, but if people want to see videos of them, since they can't actually come into my fish room and see them, I'd be willing to make a very short video to send them so they can better see the quality of fish.
Right.
So that's one way you can get around that during these separated times. But yeah, so I guess my next point on this, on the start with the best you possibly can topic, is if you are purchasing juveniles, not breeding pairs, but you're purchasing juveniles and you're wishing to raise them up into future breeders, make sure, and I'm laughing because you're going to have a story about this, Steve. Make sure you buy enough of them that you're going to have a good male-female ratio for the type of fish you intend to breed. Some fish are pairs. Some fish like to breed with one male and several females. It depends what you're setting up. So let's say, for instance, if I'm doing ancestress, say I'm out looking for some super red long fins, and I can only find juveniles, I myself would prefer to buy a breeding pair. But if I can only find juveniles, Steve's gonna laugh because my number is the same as his number for what he likes to buy, but he got really, really bad luck. I want to start with at least 6. I want to start with at least 6. That gives me a good chance, good chance of a good ratio that I'll at least get a pair out of it, or a couple females and a couple males. But stuff can still happen, so maybe start with 10, right, Steve?
Yeah. Well, generally, over the years, it's been 6 for me. You buy 6, you end up with 1 pair at least, probably usually 2 pairs. A couple of years ago, I started in with the Rams. I bought 6. I ended up with 3 pairs.
And that's perfect.
Right? So I after that, like about a year and a half ago, I bought 6 nanolutes, which is kind of a yellowy blue fish. 6 juveniles I bought. Every single one of them turned out to be male. And then it gets even better than that, because I picked up all those Odessa barbs from you. I think there were 15 or 16 of them.
Oh, right.
Every single one of them is female. I don't have a single male.
That's hilarious. Because almost every single one of those, of that batch that I gave you, I kept a few of them too. And I think they're all females. Or sorry, all males. I think they're all males.
So yeah, you never know, right? Like 6 is usually a good number, but in the last year and a half, I've been burned by that twice.
Twice. So you got to bump up to, well, you went 15 and you still didn't work out. And that's probably because I kept the biggest ones.
Yeah, maybe.
And gave you the smaller ones. I'll say that's almost
could
exactly what it is. But yeah, I think 6 is generally a good number. I generally do well with that number. But
yeah, so do I.
as you say, sometimes maybe if you can afford it and have the space, maybe go 10. Maybe go
Sometimes
10, and then if you have extra when you've sorted everything out, got the ratios you want and everything else, sell off your
it's
excess.
it's tough to do with some fish, but if you're really serious about getting into breeding them, then that's kind of what you have to do. Like, if you're looking to breed discus and you don't want to spend $700 or $800 on a breeding pair, then you end up spending 400 or 500 on 10 small ones,
And then a
right?
hundred on food to get
So
them
do
to
you?
breeding size.
Yeah. So are you really saving money at that point?
I don't think so. After water changes and food and loss, you have a lot greater chance of losing younger fish.
Yeah. Yeah, if you buy
But
10 baby discus, you may end up with 4 or 5 making it to an adult size, and then out of that, you hope for a pair.
yeah, yeah, and I guess with some other types of fish, say bristlenose plecos or ancestrus and whatnot, if you buy at least 6 or 10 of them and you only want to keep a trio or two, um, you can pick. You have more choice of which ones look better, which ones look like they're better fish, and
Yeah.
so that's a good reason to get a few extras as well. I'm just going to answer a question here, Steve. Someone's asked me if the pairs I'm selling of longfin ancestrus are super reds, and they are not. They are not. The only ones I have are browns and albinos for sale. Uh, Terry says I bought 12 young filament barbs and wound up with one happy and burnt out male. I haven't tried collecting eggs yet. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but I did do a video on breeding Odessa barbs, Terry, and I am most certain that um, how I did that would work very, very well for your barbs as well. Um, so yeah, get start with the best you can, and if you're getting juveniles, start with more than you want to end up with, and it'll give you better chances for success. There's
Yeah.
so many ways to screw up a fish room, so many ways, and this is why all these little things add up together. And then when you get into um, like breeding clownfish, I breed clownfish, and I can tell you that there are so many ways to kill baby clownfish larvae. Like they look for a reason to die. So if you don't take risk mitigation and limit your risks, reduce your risks, you have a better chance for success. If you don't do that, I am telling you flat out, your chances for success are like nothing. Like they're terrible. I've actually gone to the point now, Steve. I've been having such a horrible time getting clownfish larvae through metamorphosis and into baby clownfish that I actually moved my larvae system to a dark room. To a dark room that just has a little light over the tank. It's quiet. Nobody ever goes in there. Like I mean like they are on their own. They have the most peaceful place because I don't even want loud sounds near them. I'm telling you, they just look for a reason to die. So
So that's where you started, though, right? You had them in a closet before, right?
yeah, that's why I went back to that way because that's where I had my most success.
Interesting.
I actually started breeding for Steve knows this, but some of you may not. When I first attempted to breed clownfish, I started in my walk-in closet of my bedroom. So again, dark, quiet space, and that way they were right there. I could check on them as soon as I got up in the morning before I went to bed, everything else. But I did everything quiet, left the light off, like it was all, and it worked. And when I brought them out into an open room, when I brought them into an open room and there's lots of commotion around and lots of risks, it just was not working. So I'm going back to what I know worked, and actually the small batch that I have in there is going through metamorphosis right now, and I've only lost 4 larvae since I started out of about 40. So that's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why we talk about risk, and some fish are more risk management is needed than others, but in the end, it's needed for all of them. There's a couple questions here. Leslie's Aquatic has asked, how often will Bristlenose breed? It depends. It depends on your water quality, the foods you're feeding them, how many available females, how many available caves, and if the male is able to trap the females in the caves that you've provided. There are a lot of variables. I've had some breed as soon as I take the baby fry out of the cave. Within 2 days, there's eggs again, and I have some that breed on a monthly basis. I have some that only breed once every couple months. It all depends on the fish, the tank, and the conditions.
Yeah, I think mine are breeding probably every week to 2 weeks.
She meant how often will one bristlenose female be able to lay eggs? She's got several males, but only one female. Yeah, I'd get another female or two. I guess she will breed as often as the male is able to trap her.
Yeah, probably similar to angels and stuff like that. It takes them about a week or so to build up more eggs, and then
Yeah. My clownfish, the earliest they've ever bred was 9 days apart. They laid eggs, looked after those eggs for 8 days. I took the eggs, they bred the next day. So, depends on the fish and everything else. The next thing on here, we kind of already talked about it, but we didn't talk about all the things that quarantining aquatic plants allows you to deter from getting in your systems. So, quarantine aquatic plants. I never used to think about it until I had some bad worms that destroyed part of my fish room, cost me a lot of money. If you don't want certain invasive snails in your tanks, you may want to quarantine and or dip your aquatic plants. Parasites and unwanted allergies. Anything else you can think of, Steve, for the plants?
oh, I think you got it covered. I mean, I try not to bring in too many plants anymore. I have lots of plants to choose from in all my different tanks, so I don't really bring in a lot of plants anymore.
Yeah. I don't bring in a whole lot either. But yeah, I do it with a bleach dip myself.
Yeah.
I bleach dip most of my plants before I bring them in now.
That's what I do too.
I don't want somebody's blackbeard algae in my tanks. And there could be one tiny little strand on it that you didn't see, even a spore of it that you didn't see on your plants. They may not have even known they had it.
If you want to get rid of that, that's easy to kill, though.
It is, but I'm saying why not even introduce it?
It's nasty, though. It looks horrible.
It does, and I'm saying any kind of algae or whatnot that you don't want introduced to your tank, that's going to need to be done. A lot of people don't think about that as well. Algae just doesn't come out of the air. Algae needs to be introduced.
Yeah, I still struggle with a string algae that got introduced to my tank somehow, and I pull it out by the bucketful some days.
I have an invasive plant that I introduced to the tank from a seed that I bought from the Wish app from China. And it's this yeah, it's terrible. I don't even remember what it's called, but it like grows like vine like through everything, just chokes everything out, takes over. It's horrible, and I've been unable because it's a plant. It's not an algae. It's not like a bleach dip kills it. It's tougher than the other plants. Like it's yeah, I haven't been able to figure out how to get rid of it, but I absolutely hate it. And removing it manually is the only way I've been able to do it. But it breaks off. Little pieces break off as you're removing it manually. So I've actually never successfully been able to get it out of a tank without totally starting the tank over again.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's horrible. I'll look up the name and post it because don't ever get it thinking you're doing a good thing.
Right.
So my next part of risk management in a fish breeding operation, and this one also pertains to just if you have a tank or two, is proper food for your fish. So to start that, for some people that feed live foods, make sure your live foods are free of unwanted pathogens. That's one really big risk with feeding live foods that have been introduced from an environment outside of your breeding room. Let's say you are breeding very large fish, large cichlids, pacus, piranhas, stuff like that, and you like to feed actual live fish. If you're getting those live fish from outside of your fish room, you're running a risk every single time of introducing disease to your tanks. So what would you do in that situation, Steve?
I personally don't use live food other than things like brine shrimp and microworms,
So if
grindle worms.
I don't
But
have
if
any
you're
fish for that either. Yeah.
if you're feeding feeder fish, make sure that the feeder fish are healthy because otherwise you're just asking to kill your fish.
Most definitely. And I'll take it a step further. If I had fish that I needed to feed live fish to entice them to breed, I would raise them myself. I would use something like low quality or call guppies or something like that that can breed prolifically, and I would do them in house, so I wasn't bringing any pathogens from outside of my fish room.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That's my idea for it, anyways. The other idea is if you're good, frozen foods. Frozen foods are generally fine. Generally fine. Um, Freezing usually destroys anything that's going to hurt your fish.
Yeah,
So
I use some frozen food, but what I do is thaw them in a small container of water first, and then I pour out all the gross water,
yeah,
and then I feed the frozen food that's left over because I don't want all that extra gunk in my water.
no, that's an extremely good way of doing it for sure. I'm generally too lazy for that. I usually that's a bad risk management thing I do. I just throw it in the tank, but I don't use it very often at all. Frozen foods.
Yeah, I don't use it very often either. Usually it's baby brine shrimp or cyclops or something for fry that I use it with.
Yeah, yeah, and I found it's generally pretty safe.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I'll take it a step further here. So there are certain types of fish, and I'll rhyme a few of them off here. Uh, Many types of Mabuna, African cichlids, Tropheus, African cichlids, Ancestrus, Bristlenose plecos. They are not carnivores. They are vegetarians. They are vegetarians. We could call them omnivores, but they're not even that. They are vegetarians, and if I was going to put them in another class of what they eat would be an insectivore with those fish. So vegetable-based, maybe with a little bit of insect protein, would be the food that most of those fish require, right? So what happens if, I'll let you answer this one, Steve, what happens if you give a Tropheus or a Bristlenose pleco, let's say, way too much aquatic animal protein or say mammal pro like beef heart or something like that? What's going to happen? What chance? Is there a chance that something's going to happen?
Yeah, their digestive systems are not set up for that kind of bioload, so you run the risk of constipation and bloating and all kinds of nastiness that can go on internally.
Yeah, and it kills them. Bottom line, it kills them. There's not too much you can do to relieve those symptoms other than proper diet, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, you got to feed them the right food.
So when I say this, and I'm bringing this up because I hear lots of people, even some people that like really reach out to a large audience, unlike me, given some really bad advice sometimes, and that is we're talking about risk management. So the risk management of that is if I have a grow-out tank full of Ancestrus, Bristlenose plecos, I am not going to throw in food that there is even the chance that they will have a difficult time digesting for a couple of reasons. A, I don't want them to get bloats. B, if a fish has a difficult time digesting food that you're giving them, you're abrupting that growth rate. And C, a food that maybe they don't even like, and it's going to sit on the bottom of your tank and rot and cause an ammonia spike. A lot of people think that Ancestrus need a treat once in a while of, say, a ball of bloodworms or what have you. Something that's offering, let's say, beef heart. If you ever gave them beef heart, I think they would all curl up dead at the bottom of your tank. But giving them stuff that they're not really designed to digest. Sometimes they get a little bit of it here and there, but they would much prefer vegetable matter. So that's the diet I would give them. Is essentially a vegetable-based diet. Now that goes the same with other types of fish, right, Steve? So if you have a carnivore, you're not going to feed it lettuce, right? You're going to feed a carnivore krill, shrimp, like good aquatic proteins. Now, do you remember the talk Jeff Mountjoy gave?
Yep.
And I've had him on the show as well, speaking about fish nutrition. And the one thing I take away from what Jeff says, and this goes against most discus breeders and whatnot, is fish have a better time digesting and using the proteins from aquatic animals and insects. Now,
Yeah,
I trust what Jeff says. This is his business. He's deep into that business, and it makes sense. Not too many fish eat cows.
Yeah.
Not too many. Some do. If a cow fell into a river full of piranhas, some do.
I'm sure if something like that fell into the water and started decaying, the fish would go and eat it because they're opportunistic, but it's not something that they would regularly come across.
No, they're probably going to eat another fish most of the time, right?
Yeah. Fish or insects or worms or...
Yeah. So, to reduce our risks of them not getting the proper nutrition and whatnot, I believe a little bit of research is in order if you're going to breed fish to feed them what they would get in nature, or as close as you can to what they would get in nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess the only other thing I really wrote here for this, Steve, is maybe shy away from the cheap quality foods. If you're going to offer prepared foods, commercial prepared foods, which I do, maybe make sure that they're a quality food. Maybe read the ingredients list. Do a little bit of research on that as well. Because all these fillers in this food are going to end up as waste in the bottom of your tank, thus creating ammonia, water quality issues, and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
All right, Steve, you ready for this one?
Sure.
Water testing. I kind of smirk when I say that, because there's a lot of people out there that think they can just look at their water and know if they have ammonia or nitrates or what have you through their water column. And I will be right here to tell you that you can't see it. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. Maybe you taste ammonia. I don't know. Burn your tongue.
Well, you can smell it if it's bad enough, but if it's bad enough, you probably don't have any fish left.
Yeah, if you can smell it, your fish are dead. Yeah, almost guaranteed. So, what should we be testing for, and how do we do it?
Well, there's a lot of test kits out there.
Sorry for my dirty hands. I got glue stuck to all my hands. I'm a flooring installer. But ammonia test kit.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got to read this text. Someone's been trying to... Okay. Never mind. Someone's texting me, but we'll text them back later. Ammonia. I'd say that's the number one thing to test for, wouldn't you?
I would say, yeah. I don't typically use a lot of test kits myself. I do in certain conditions. So I have the one tank with the L128s in it that I have actually reduced the pH down to 6 now.
Oh, awesome.
So that one I test regularly to make sure that I'm keeping the water consistent. But otherwise, I'll test every once in a while. I actually test my feed bucket more than I test any of the tanks, just to make sure that I'm not changing the water too much.
I test when I'm not going to do a big water change, but I want to make sure that things are still okay. So like I do a lot of ammonia testing on my saltwater stuff.
Right.
Like my fry rearing rack for my clownfish. But I have a lot invested on that rack too, right? So I want to make sure that whole system is going good. So I test for ammonia on that, and that's about, and obviously my larvae tanks.
Yeah, I find I test more on new environments. Like if I'm setting up a new tank or a new rack, then I'll be testing the water regularly to make sure that things are cycling properly and staying stable. But after the tank's been set up for 6 months or so, yeah, I don't start testing the water unless I start seeing signs of problems. Like if I see fish sitting at the surface gasping for air, the first thing I'll do is test the water and change half of it.
You bring me to another point that I'm going to talk about in just we'll skip to it, because you just brought up like the best point of risk management. Now, what I was just holding up was it's made by CChem, and it's called Pneumonia Alert Badge. And you put this inside your tank, and I'll say it's fairly reliable. You put this inside your tank, and it will constantly monitor your ammonia for you. Where this comes in handy is in fry tanks that you have overcrowded, that you do a lot of water changes on, that you have a lot of biofiltration, and it's a good way to know if your cycle has been interrupted or if you just have too much load on your cycle. It's a good way to know that. Or if you're still at the stage where you're just using an air stone and you're not able to filter the tank.
Right.
So it's a pretty handy thing. I'd say what I test for absolutely the most, Steve, is temperature.
Yep.
I have a temperature gun, and I go around and I check almost every tank every day while I'm doing the first feeding on them. And I'm mainly just looking to make sure that I haven't had a heater malfunction.
Right. Yeah, I do the same thing. I have a temperature gun. I just walk around with it while I'm feeding the fish. And I don't really worry about pH unless it's a specific thing like the L128s that I'm trying to mimic natural habitat.
On a side note, are you having any luck with them? Are they starting to...
No, not really. They're just kind of hanging out.
Yeah, they're tough. I have a male that hangs in a cave a lot, but I haven't seen him even really attempt to trap a female.
Yeah, I think it has to be very specific conditions.
We have a question here, Steve, and that is, what's the best way to combat ick in a 20-gallon tank?
Ick.
Yeah, ick. Icky ick.
Well, it happens. Usually triggered by stress and temperature swings, but it can happen to anybody at any time, really.
There's
I find just using salts is good. Raise the temperature, dose salt.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it. There is actual ick medications out there. I believe they're mainly methyl blue in them, though. What the content of the medication is.
Methylene blue or malachite green, one of the two.
Yeah, so I pretty much do the same as you do, Steve. I raise the temperature, and what the temp... I guess we'll explain a little bit on why we raise the temperature. We raise the temperature because that increases the life cycle of the ick larvae. Well, the ick life cycle, I will say. So when you, so when you speed it up, that allows for it all to get taken care of faster while you're still dosing with high doses of salt and methyl. I use methylene blue as well. If I'm battling ick, I haven't, knock on wood, had an ick outbreak in a very, very long, like years. But yeah, I have had ick outbreaks, and that's what works for me. Dose the tank. I would do it twice. Do it for 24 hours. Make sure you take your carbon out when you're doing this as well.
Yeah.
I would do it for 24 hours. 25% water change. Do it again for another.
I would say even more. If I have Vic in the tank, I'll do 50% water changes daily.
It doesn't hurt to do more. Yes.
No, because the way they spread is when they come out of the fish, that's what leaves the little white mark on the side of the body, and then they go and they lay all their eggs on the bottom of the tank. So if you're siphoning out the tank every day 50%, you're getting rid of all those eggs that will reinfect the fish.
That's a very good point, Steve. Very good. And yeah, then repeat the process again. And repeat it a third time if you have to, if you feel the need to. Bumping your temperature up to as much, it depends. When I say all this too, remember there are variants, right? Like if you have certain fish that are unable to live in a higher temperature, then this method may not work for you that well. So Or
have to be
you'll just
careful
have
with
to
that.
do it longer. Yeah, you'll just have to do it longer. Um,
And it doesn't have to be much, right? Like you don't have to raise it up to 90, for example. Like that would be way too high. Like just
mhm.
2 or 3 degrees usually is enough to.
Yeah, 80, 82. If you can get it to that, it works. It works great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's basically what we know about doing ick. Um, Terry says, I see a lot of new guppy breeders blame bad genetics and fry when in fact they have water quality and nutrition issues. Yeah, most
Yeah.
bad fins in guppies is because of water quality, split fins and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um,
Split fins are notorious. I've seen the female guppies that I have downstairs. They fight with each other and chase each other and grab their fins. And if you've
yeah,
got too many fish in the tank, then that happens all over the place. And yeah, the fins can get torn, and then they get infected and start fin rot. And it's a lot of to do with stress, right?
yeah, yeah, and a lot of fry die because of stress as well.
Yeah.
If if they're stressed out, thinking they're being preyed upon, or they just like to hide, they don't like to be seen. They know that they're at the bottom of the food chain. Sometimes giving them a place of relief of stress is a good thing. And that brings me to our next point, Steve, and that is observing your fish. That is a huge risk management tool that you can
Yeah.
use. Um, so this is something I've taken a couple of things out of this book. And I'm just saying this because I don't want to copyright infringements, and this person deserves the credit for it. And the author is Joyce D. Wilkerson. This is a fantastic book about keeping and breeding clownfish with a lot of information. And something she talked about in there was called DSR. It's called Doesn't Seem Right. So when you're looking at your fish and something doesn't seem right, which could be anything. A fish has lost its appetite, a fish has a damaged fin, or a fish has an ick spot, or a fish has a bacterial infection starting, gasping for air, labored breathing, up at the top of the tank if they're generally at the bottom of the tank, um, won't come out of their cave to eat. Right, Steve? Like so many little
Yeah.
things we look at in our fish, and if you are attentive and observant to them, you'll notice if something's doesn't seem right. And if it doesn't seem
Absolutely.
right, it probably isn't.
Probably isn't. You're right.
Or a fish is getting picked on by another fish. This can be just because your fish are jerks. That's mainly the case with clownfish. They're jerks. So if you have juvenile clownfish together, they'll find somebody to pick on just because they like to pick on. Uh, Sometimes it's because a fish isn't right. Sometimes it's because one of their siblings, if it's a group of juveniles we're talking about that we're raising out, uh, sometimes they will kill one of their siblings just because there is something wrong with them and they don't want them a part of their school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can happen.
Sometimes it's overcrowding. It could be anything, but if you have a fish that's getting picked on and you can't see anything that's really wrong with it, and even if you do, it's best to remove that fish and either remove it to a safe place to continue growing out, or if you see that there are serious issues that don't fit your breeding program or whatever, you need to make a decision to either rehome or call that fish. Yeah, you can see then, well, if they're skinny, if they're fat, if they look bloated, if they have parasites, infections. You're able to see if they've laid eggs in your tank, if your breeders have laid eggs in your tank. If something doesn't seem right, So if you have a parental fish that's off somewhere in your tank looking after fry and or eggs, that fits into the doesn't seem right because you don't see them out participating in the tank as they normally would. And that's your cue to know that you've had some success with your fish spawning.
Yeah, it's always important to keep an eye on your fish and learn their behaviors, and then you can tell if something's wrong.
Exactly. I guess, yeah, just knowing something's wrong is the first step in being able to correct it. If you don't know something's wrong, then yeah, you can't do anything about it. And if you notice too late, it just might be too late to do something about it. So by observing your fish and watching your fish in your breeding program or your fish tank, another thing that observation allows, like I said, is to see if your fish have spawned and or spawning behavior, if you can see a spawn is going to come. This is incredibly important with certain types of fish. For instance, if you're breeding clownfish, if you leave your eggs in with the parents and let them hatch in the parents' tanks, the parents will eat the eggs, or they'll get sucked up into the filters, or they will not survive. Those larvae need to go to a separate rearing tank. So by observation and marking down dates and being observant and knowing how long your eggs take to incubate to hatch allows me to look after them easier and collect the eggs. I know that my clownfish hatch 8 days after they've been laid. So I keep a close eye and go, oh, they've laid eggs again in the pot. Okay, I need to go to the calendar and mark today's hatch date, and in 8 days they're going to hatch. And it's for 8 days for my fish has been very, very consistent. So there's reasons to observe for that. Now, removing the eggs. Why would we remove the eggs and or fry? Let's say with Ancestris, Bristlenose plecos, I remove the fry once their yolk sacs are getting depleted into a separate little breeder box. Why do I do this? Because Bristlenose plecos don't eat their fry. They don't. They let them live. But I do this because I can see them better. I know what I have then, and I can put the food straight to them when I put them in a little breeder box. I know I can put the food right in front of their face and gives them a better chance to figure out what they're supposed to be eating. And I know you do a lot of the similar things with angelfish, Steve.
Yeah, the angels nowadays, they typically eat their eggs no matter what, but sometimes you get lucky. So I always remove them and raise the fry separately.
Yeah.
It's just safer that way. I mean, I have a pair that will leave the eggs until they've actually hatched. So I mean, if you can do that, then that's great because they'll look after the eggs way better than any person will. But yeah, you run the risk of losing them to cannibalism.
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. And when you remove the eggs and or fry, you can give them specific food for their needs, right? Because their needs will be smaller and different than the parents' needs.
Absolutely.
Another reason, as we've previously mentioned, Steve, is like you said about your angelfish, you keep your bioload really low on your angelfish breeding tank, like where your breeding pairs are. If you start raising if you start raising fry in those tanks with them, you're going to increase that bioload, and your tank might not be capable of it since it's not generally used to that, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If you get the nice thing with fry though is they're really small, and they, the biofilter and everything will adjust to it as the fry grow. But if you're adding way more food than you normally are, then that's that can cause problems with the filtration. It just can't keep up with the food. It's the food problem more than the fry problem.
Yeah, and that's why I've gone to bare bottom for a lot of my grow out tanks. Just because if
I
I
I've been doing the same thing. I've been getting rid of all the gravel. It's just too much work that way.
Yeah, you can see what's left over on the bottom of the tank. You can much easier get rid of it, get it out of the tank before it starts to develop into ammonia as it rots. Because that's basically what uneaten food is doing on the bottom of your tank, is rotting.
Yeah.
And if you have gravel in your tank, then all that food's getting down in between the gravel and everything else, and you can't see it. And it's gonna not help your bio load, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I do apologize. I'm gonna have to run in about 5 minutes or so.
You got another meeting, do you?
Yeah.
Well, Steve, I really only have one more thing on my list, okay?
All right.
And that is sanitation.
Oh boy, sanitation.
So
Something
let's
that
go real quick.
I don't do very much of, which I should actually do more. I might have been avoiding some of that issue I had a year and a half ago if I'd been a little bit more careful with that.
So for sanitation, what I have written down here is clean your nets, clean your
Yep.
buckets, clean your siphons, clean your rotifer sieves if you have rotifers.
Yep.
Your sponges that you clean the algae off on the inside of your glass with, make sure you sanitize those as well. And I also use a dedicated laundry tub to adjust my fish room. Nothing
Yep.
goes in that laundry tub except fish water and fish stuff, and that's where I clean all my fish stuff. I'm not incredibly crazy on the sanitation, although I do keep bleach down here, and I do use bleach when I feel the need. If I have a sick tank, everything is getting bleached from that sick tank. What I generally do is use extremely hot water, like 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and I rinse all my stuff and scrub all my stuff out in very, very hot water, so it should kill off most things it comes in contact with.
Yeah. The scrub pads thing, I actually take mine and cut them into smaller strips, and then I have one for each tank, and I just leave it on top of the lid.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. If you're not willing to do any of these sanitation practices, then you should have equipment specific for each system you're running in your fish room.
Yeah, so I after that episode, um, I actually have two siphons. One that I use for most of the tanks in the fish room, and then I have one specifically for quarantine tanks, and they don't mix.
No, no. Hello, GRB Aquatics. Yes, we're all doing great, and I got a few hundred baby woodcats.
Keep going, do they?
Oh yeah, yeah. I have a 5-gallon bucket just full of eggs right now to hatch out in a bucket. Yeah. But thank you so much, Steve, for coming on and helping me go through all this aquarium room risk management stuff. I feel
Yeah,
I could actually, or we could actually do another live stream just on this topic alone.
probably.
There is so much to cover in it, but I think we've covered a lot for today.
Absolutely.
So before we give everybody a headache, we should probably just sign off. So thank you, everybody, for joining the live stream today. I hope you got something out of it. These are some really important points, and if you missed the live stream, by all means, go back, or you came in halfway, go back and check it out from the beginning, because every single point that we've made in here is very, very important to your fish room and or just your fish tank. We could save you a lot of money, time, aggravation, and loss of life with your fish. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Happy fish keeping. Thank you, Steve.
Yep. Thank you.
And until next time, take care, everybody. Bye for now.